For a devout Jehovah's Witness, a sudden car crash, a complication with birth, or even a routine surgery can put them in a very peculiar dilemma. If a medical team says, hey, the only way to survive is by means of a blood transfusion, you would think that that would be a no-brainer. But for a Jehovah's Witness patient and their family, the answer is not so simple. Today we're going to discuss how a religious doctrine that was built on cherry-picking a couple of scriptures leads to preventable tragedies. A story that repeats itself in silent cases all around the world. So, how exactly did a religion that promotes love for God and the sanctity of life come to enforce a policy that demands a premature death? Let's talk about it. Now, first of all, this isn't some sort of theoretical debate. This is not as simple as, well, is a hot dog really a sandwich, or does pineapple really belong on a pizza? Those type of things have absolutely no bearing on anything in the real world, okay? This policy is a real world conflict that deals with human lives. Now, while the Watchtower doesn't release official numbers on this matter, there's been independent analysis done as well as insider reports that suggest hundreds, maybe even thousands die every year from refusing blood. Since the policy was introduced in 1945, researchers speculate that the total number of deaths could actually be in the tens of thousands. And these are not just statistics. These are someone's parents, someone's spouse, someone's children. Those numbers represent families that were shattered by having to make a choice between faith and medicine. So what we're going to do is pull back the curtain. We're going to explore the scriptural roots of the no blood policy, and we're going to also expose the crazy amount of pressure that's placed on Jehovah's Witnesses while their life just hangs in limbo. But to understand the consequences, first you have to understand the rule itself. The core of the doctrine is a literal interpretation of, as I mentioned, a few cherry-picked Bible passages. For the Jehovah's Witnesses, abstaining from blood means refusing transfusions of whole blood and its four main components. So that's red cells, white cells, platelets, and plasma. They can't donate blood, they can't store blood for later usage, none of that. And the thing is, this isn't taught as a guideline. It's not one of those things where it's like, hey, just to be on the safe side, we're not exactly sure if you should be, taking blood transfusions. Maybe that's something you should avoid. No, this is presented as a divine, non-negotiable command from God himself. The go-to scriptures that the Jehovah's Witnesses use are typically Genesis 9:4, Leviticus 17:10, and then the be-all, end-all is Acts 15:28 and 29. In Genesis, it says, you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And then Leviticus kind of parrots that same thing. But in Acts, it actually says, abstain from blood. And that's the one that they kind of push the hardest. Watchtower's argument is that abstaining from blood means more than just eating it, which is contrary to other, Christian organizations who will say that that was more so referring to a dietary law. They use this analogy where they say, if a doctor tells you to abstain from alcohol, that means not drinking it, but it also means not injecting it into your veins, which I see where they're going with it, but it's still kind of a stupid analogy because even the most hardcore of alcoholics out here, I've never known them to inject it into their veins. So where they would even come up with that, I don't know. But nevertheless, they say that blood is sacred, and accepting a transfusion is seen as the ultimate disrespect to Jehovah. And it's ultimately an act that can cause you to lose your everlasting life. And you see, that right there is where they have so many people in a chokehold, because you start to reason, well, hey, I might as well go out now and then have my chance to come back in the resurrection and get everlasting life. But what happens when this doctrine collides with a real life medical emergency? Emergency situations with massive blood loss is where this policy becomes lethal. You see, science is very clear. When a patient's blood levels plummet, the risk of death goes from 0 to 100 like that. That's just the sad reality of it. In a 1994 issue of the Awake magazine entitled Youths Who Put God First, the cover featured 26 children and young people who the Watchtower was celebrating them as basically martyrs. And I think it was absolutely disgusting to depict children who have lost their lives for refusing blood transfusions. They're basically celebrating the fact that someone chose obedience to an organization over top of life itself. And the way they try to spin it is that it's just the ultimate test of faith. Like, oh man, those sure were some faithful brothers and sisters. But the thing is, faith should save lives, but in this case, it was ending them. And having to make a choice like that is damn near impossible. There's absolutely nothing loving about putting a person in that type of predicament where they have to juggle their own life with their religious beliefs. Now, what about the people that say, you know what, the hell with that, I'm going to choose to live? Well, I couldn't find specific information regarding how this is handled, but I do know that this is not one of those things where you can say that you're repentant and maybe get some counseling and just, go back and auxiliary pioneer a couple of months later. Like, this is going to land you in some hot water with the organization for sure. Most likely, it's going to lead to being disfellowshipped, and then from there, the whole shunning practice starts. So now you're in a situation where you're being shunned for literally just wanting to save your own life. Sounds like a loving organization, right? Now, Jehovah's Witnesses take pride in being the ones who pioneered the whole field of bloodless surgery. Basically, their refusal to accept blood transfusions spurred this whole medical innovation where drugs that boost red cell production and cell salvage machines can actually recycle a patient's own blood. And so, as a result, other patients have benefited from these innovations as well, and it's made surgeries safer. But here's the catch. Those type of things work best when the surgeries are planned. What happens when there's no time to plan? For example, a car crash. In a sudden traumatic situation, these alternatives a lot of times fall short. Now, this puts the doctors in a dilemma because every competent adult has the right to refuse medical treatment. And if you were a witness, you know that they carry the no blood cards with them. Once upon a time, I thought it was cool. I wanted to actually have the little miniature ones that you could put on your keychain. But what if the patient is a child or the patient is unconscious? Well, in a lot of countries, the courts are actually forced to intervene and order the transfusions for minors, which is gonna be in opposition to the parents' beliefs, because now the doctors are trapped because they're caught between their oath to save a life and their duty to respect the patient's choice. All the meanwhile, the clock is steady ticking. But with lives on the line, we gotta ask a more important question. Is the doctrine even correct? Is Watchtower's interpretation of the Bible even reasonable? Most Bible scholars are going to tell you that it's not. Okay, the first objection is that they're taking a huge leap to try to connect a dietary law to a medical procedure. The biblical laws were about respect for life in the context of food. Draining an animal's blood before eating it, this was a symbolic act, okay? This was to distance the Israelites from pagan rituals. Scholars will argue a transfusion has nothing to do with food. It's not nourishment or any of the above. This is a liquid organ transplant that's meant to save lives, not disrespect it. Now, that's a key point to remember. Liquid organ transplant. This is where it gets messy because Watchtower actually permits organ transplants. They say with that, it's a matter of conscience. So if a person can accept a kidney to save their own life, then why is blood, which is the river of life, forbidden? Their argument makes absolutely no sense. And when you look at the context of that key scripture they use in Acts 15:28 to 29, the abstain from blood is listed right alongside of other things like abstaining from food offered to idols. Paul came back later and said that eating this same food was not a sin. So that would lead you to believe that those were just temporary guidelines to have harmony within the church. These were not meant to be lifelong rules that were on the same level as do not murder. But that's where the cherry picking comes into play because Watchtower has taken that one rule that was listed there and elevated it to a loyalty test that's punishable by spiritual death. So, in a nutshell, this no blood propaganda, it puts believers in a position where there's two choices. Either they can disregard what they're told that's God's absolute law and be casted out by everybody they know, or they can refuse this life-saving treatment and leave their loved ones behind to mourn them. The whole policy is built on shaky scriptural interpretation, a bunch of contradictions, and confusing a medical procedure with a dietary law. But if the price of loyalty is your own heartbeat, then maybe it's just time to start questioning who you're loyal to. When the enforcement of a religious doctrine demands the sacrifice of human life, you got to ask yourself, is it an act of faith or is it an act of harm? If you've been affected by this policy or you know someone that has, whether that's a current member, former member, family member, even if you're a medical professional watching this, consider sharing your story in the comments below. Because while this might be a painful subject to talk about, it's an important subject to talk about and it deserves to have some light shed on it. So, thank you guys for watching. If you appreciate me sharing this type of content, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. But for now, dodge the tower, claim your power, and I'll see you on the next one.